Everybody's attention. Alright, excuse me everybody. Excuse me everybody. Okay, hello everybody. Again, my name is Clusso Mathis. I'm the co-president of the Mathis and Raymond Foundation. The other co-president is Matthew Wong, sitting right here. We'd like to welcome you to the Mathis and Raymond Lecture Series. We have been organizing this event for pretty much about a year, and tonight it will be coming to, we will start a new name for the Mathis and Raymond Lecture Series. This series will be called the Cold Hard Truth. Okay, so from now on, there's no more Mathis and Raymond Lecture Series. It's called the Cold Hard Truth. And what we're going to try to do is we're going to try to have online shows, basically where people, like the speaker tonight, is going to come give lectures on a particular specific issue, and more. We'll have a broader audience be able to give feedback and ask questions and whatnot. Also, we're taking donations for Project Youth, a program that provides outlets for youth who may not be having a positive role models and or influences in their life, that we may feel pressure to partake in the risky behavior and or commit to bad deeds, who may be in or exposed to an environment with dangers, drugs, gangs, violence, at home and or elsewhere at risk. The Project Youth is designed to instill self-esteem, friendship, community awareness, sportsmanship, wellness, and joint concerns of the well-being and success of all members, associated and donors that come from all races, genders, cultures, religions, and walks of life. The donation jar is here in the front, and if you would like to donate, please, it would be greatly appreciated. Also, we would like to thank Cafe Hay for allowing us to have these events for up to a year now. We plan to continue to do so, and we would ask that you patronize the business here. They do us a big favor by letting us have these events. So now I'm going to introduce the speaker, Mr. Chris LaRue. Mr. Chris LaRue has a BA in American Studies, American History, American Political Science, and American Literature from Eckerd's College, and a master's degree in Exercise and Sports Science from the University of Memphis. He is particularly a student and adherent of the Austrian School of Economics, Philosophy, Objectivism, Voluntarism, and History. Mr. LaRue was a 5-time consecutive junior national champion and holds a 3-time senior national champion in Olympic weightlifting, and still holds 3 all-time junior American records and 2 all-time senior American records. He also represented America in the 1991 Pan Am Games and the 1991 Junior World Championships, where he became the first American to ever earn a bronze medal, and the 1994 Senior World Championships. Currently, Mr. LaRue participates in legal activism, fighting for freedom with the Fully Informed Jury Association, educating the public about jury nullification rights. He makes his living doing IT consulting, web design, web development, video editing, SEO, etc., trading commodities, a proud speculator, and is a writer. Also, Mr. LaRue has told me he's going to give a speech, and a lot of things people may not necessarily agree with, but he has, it's okay to disagree and ask questions for the question and answer session, but no yelling and no personal attacks. He said he's just going to get up and leave. He's made that perfectly clear. So no personal attacks and no yelling. Just a simple,
sounds familiar.
Civil dialogue. Okay. So, ladies and gentlemen, and also one other thing before I say something. With his speech, he's given the primary sources here on the sheet of paper. So if anyone wants to go back and check on what he says, he gives these primary sources, and I'll pass them around. So, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Chris LaRue.
First thing I'm going to say is that I'm trying to cover the entire course of American history here, and we're going to try and do it in 45 minutes. So obviously I'm going to be moving very fast. I'm basically making a string of radical assertions without support. So you can take what you want out of it. And like Claudia said, here we've got list of sources, and that's almost like what I would say a recommended reading list for anyone who's interested by whatever I say. And with that, I'm going to start. Now, I'm going to start with the American Revolution. Now, obviously, one last disclaimer. I can't cover every aspect of any one of these topics. I mean, because any one of these could, obviously, we could talk about endlessly. But I'm going to start at a certain phase in the development of the American Revolution. So I'm skipping a lot of stuff that happened before that, especially, I should say, in regard to religious freedom and the various persecutions that went on by the state regarding religion. But what I want to start with is after a long period of time, England had maintained a policy of basically what's called salutary neglect over the colonies in America, in which basically they didn't pay too much attention to America, and they didn't try to exert too much control. And so because of that, the colonists in America grew up very independent. They weren't used to people being trying to tell them what to do. And when that policy of salutary neglect ended because of a political change in England, and they began trying to assert more authority over the colonies, these independent, free-thinking people who had never given a nod to anybody in their life basically just said no way. And so this began with one of the first really onerous things that kind of began the resistance is what was called the Navigation Acts, where England was basically trying to regulate commercial activity inside the colonies and tax it, and in order to subsidize their own domestic industries. So in other words, by taxing the local production, they made their own products look cheaper in comparison. And so of course they were suppressing American business as a result. So that was one of the first things that they got really mad about. And then of course there was the Stamp Act. And the Stamp Act is another tax that the British government put on the colonists, where they said any papers that you have in your possession or deal with, whether it's a diary or anything else, you must have this stamped by our government. You must pay a fee for it. And on top of that, they could come into your house without a warrant or anybody say so at the point of a gun and make sure you have that stamp on every piece of paper in your house. So obviously, extremely tyrannical. And then we get to, there's also some other taxes we're going to get to, but I'm jumping through. We're going to get to the tea tax, so everybody talks about that. The context of the tea tax, you got to understand, England lowered the price of tea at that time. At the same instance, they put on this tea tax so that the colonists were actually paying less money for the tea. But what it basically was a way to attack local production of tea, and by increasing the cost of tea for local producers, it was going to drive them out of business because they couldn't compete with the imported tea. So even though this tax was small at that time and they were able to buy the tea cheaper, these industrialists in America realized that this was just the first salvo to basically trying to run them out of business, which is why they fought so hard over such a minuscule little tea tax. Okay, so what I want to get into now is basically my point there is to show that a lot of the objections of the American colonists were about what's called economic freedoms. All right, the ability to control their own money and their own destiny, to make their own decisions, to buy what they want without paying anything to anybody else. Now this crossed into the line of what some people would distinguish as personal freedoms, as you saw with the stamp tax, with the invasions into the home in order to collect it. So that is one of the fundamental things I really want to hammer home throughout this lecture, is that I don't believe there's any such difference between liberty in the personal realm and liberty in the economic realm. Liberty is one thing. You're either a free person or you're a slave. All right, so this brings us into economic systems. Capitalism is the system of private property and free trade. Okay. Now, when we talk about private property, of course, it's important to talk about the fact that only legitimate property titles are considered transferable. So, for instance, if you rob